Yep. There they come. All right, everybody, good morning. We're in Revelation 19, if you want to grab your Bible, and we'll get started here. Revelation 19. And let's start with a prayer, and then we'll get into it. Our dear Father, we thank you for this beautiful morning you've provided, for our opportunity to assemble together in your name, Father, and to lift up our praises to you. Please bless us today as we study your word. Be with all those who are sick today, and especially bless Bernice, Tammy, and Brian, and all those who are struggling with long-term conditions. Please be with Jimmy and help his back to feel better, and Helen with her leg, and all those on our list today. Father, we look to you for all mercy and grace. We pray for good things. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so let's just go ahead and read. By the way, we're in that section, we're transitioning sort of from the section that's really, really, really super hard to a section that we tend to enjoy spending our time in. So our effort again this morning is going to be to not get too much lost in the weeds. We have 4 Sundays left, including today. So we're doing 19, 20, 21, and 22. Boop, 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 just like that. And we might even get a little bit into chapter 20 today, actually. I've got slides to take us through half of the next chapter, just in case we need them, depending on how fast we do chapter 19. So let's go ahead and just start reading chapter 19. After these things, I heard something like a loud voice of a great multitude in heaven saying, Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and power belong to our God, because his judgments are true and righteous. For he has judged the great harlot who is corrupting the earth with her immorality, and he has avenged the blood of his bondservants on her. A second time they said, Hallelujah! Her smoke rises up forever and ever. And the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures fell down and worshiped God, who sits on the throne, saying, Amen, Hallelujah. And a voice from the throne, or came from the throne, saying, Give praise to our God, all you his bondservants, you who fear him, the small and the great. Then I heard something like the voice of a great multitude, and like the sound of many waters, and like the sound of mighty peals of thunder, saying, Hallelujah! For the Lord our God, the Almighty, reigns. Let us rejoice and be glad, and give glory to him. For the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. It was given to her to clothe herself in fine linen, bright and clean, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. Then he said to me, Write, Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, These are true words of God. Then I fell at his feet to worship him. But he said to me, Do not do that. I am a fellow servant of yours, and your brethren who hold the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Okay, so let's get our bearings one more time. What we've been studying in this section, at least from chapter 12, has... Whoops, hold on. There it goes. Maybe there it goes. Oh, really? There it goes. There it goes. All right. Is the various enemies of God's people. You remember that they start off with Satan in chapter 12. Then Satan goes to make war with the rest of the children of the woman. Those are the members of the church. Those are Christians. And he first brings up the beast from the sea, and then we have the earth beast. Then we're introduced to the harlot Babylon, which we have said for the purposes of this class represents the world forces that are arrayed against God and against his church. Probably in the days of these original audience members, it would be most likely Rome and the Roman Empire, although we don't have to limit our view to that because the wheel of history comes around over and over again, and whatever group of saints are struggling in any place, that's certainly going to be the world forces, the way they're arrayed against those saints in that place and in that time. You're going to see by the end of chapter 19 that these various bad actors start receiving the judgments that have been announced throughout these chapters. So we're actually getting to the culmination of this fight. It's not that the fight will be over forever, because final judgment is yet to come. That starts in chapter 20. But these various forces that Satan has brought up against the saints now begin to receive their judgments. And as is often fitting in the Bible, things are done in the reverse order. And so indeed, we're going to see the judgment of those four in the reverse order that they were introduced to us. So who's going to get judged first? The harlot Babylon is the first one who's going to receive judgment. What were some of the things that we talked about last week? If we're correct in identifying Babylon as Rome, what were some of the things that were giving Rome her power? Don't just answer Satan, because I know that's true, but more specifically, what were some of the ways that Babylon exercised that power in the world against the saints? We talked a lot about this last week.
Being able to buy and sell.
Good. There was an economic factor that was involved, that Babylon, aka Rome, was so powerful in that day that the entire world economy was based around Rome. The merchants were rejoicing in order to participate in the immorality of Babylon, because that's how they became wealthy. And one of the things that we already saw and will continue to see is that when Babylon is judged, the whole world mourns, because now their ability to buy and sell is also taken away from them. Just imagine, to kind of get our minds wrapped around this, if you were on the city council of the city of Orlando and Disney was wiped out. What would your next city council meeting be all about? Huh? The budget. Absolutely right. You would be having a budget meeting, because if Disney goes under, then all of the other parks go under, then all of the tax base goes under, which means your roads, your schools, your everything is going to go under, because that town is built around the mouse. And if you ever mess with the mouse, you're going to mess up the town. Imagine what would happen to our world economy today if the United States of America defaulted and went under. Not that that's anywhere close to being on the horizon, but if it ever did happen, you would see a cascade of events, which we actually saw a little bit of in 2007 when our housing market was so messed up that there was a worldwide recession that happened as a result of the American banking system. That was just a little foretaste of the way these things are so connected, so built upon one another, so that when Babylon goes under in these chapters, the whole world suffers the same effects at the same time. Jerry?
It's a plethora of these things. History keeps repeating itself.
Yes.
The more things change, the more they remain the same. It's always like that. And so it could be a combination of all of those things. And I think that really is what it's because we have to remember always God is in charge, and these things keep coming up, and it's not about the physical, it's about the spiritual, period. That's it.
Yes, well, ultimately that is the message, and that's what we spent so much time last week on, appropriately, that when we're faced with a world system that is so interconnected and so powerful and so successful, that begins to persecute the saints, that begins to hold the church outside of everything that it's involved in, so that, if you don't take this vow of loyalty to the Roman Caesars, you cannot enter the marketplace, you cannot join the various trade guilds, you cannot buy or sell. That makes life very difficult. And so Christians are going to have to do what we see them doing in the book of Acts, which is when persecution arises in one place, what do? They move. They go somewhere else where it's not so bad. Eventually, the bad chases them practically everywhere they go. But to understand that's what Christians have always experienced, is that separation between themselves and the world, eventually, for most of history, leads us to a situation where it is difficult to participate in normal worldly life. Because we are looked down upon as, persona non grata, people you don't want to have anything to do with at all, because of their horrible Christian religion. So I think sometimes we fail to appreciate what a charmed, blessed sliver of history and geography we happen to inhabit right now. This is the way that it is most of the time. What we have experienced is a brief period of time in one corner of the world where it's pretty good for Christians. Eventually, it will not be so any longer. So, all right, good. We talked about the economic factors. The religious factor, of course, is at the center of all this. What does Rome want its followers to do? The earth beast makes the world worship the sea beast, which is that probably cult of emperor worship, demanding you burn a pinch of incense to the name of Caesar and participate in the Greco-Roman pantheon to be allowed to be a part of the Roman Empire. And if you don't, then we don't want you, basically, and you might even be worse than that. We may persecute you, confiscate your property, your belongings, and either push you out or kill you and your family. So what is the ultimate outcome for those who say, whoa, I don't want to experience that. I will go ahead and burn my pinch of incense, and I don't want to live that hard life. I'll cooperate with the forces of the world. What's the eventual outcome? Judgment, which we're going to see more of today. We already saw a little bit of it the last 2 weeks, but we'll see more of it today. Those who refuse to have fellowship with the beast and Satan and the harlot Babylon, what are those people's eventual outcome? Persecution for now, and then when judgment comes, salvation and vindication. And that's what the book of Revelation is written to do, is to assure us where these things are going and whose side of things we want to be on. So, again, my last comment before we go back to the text is that what we're viewing in chapter 19 are the judgments upon the forces present in that day and time. That Satan is behind, but things like the Roman emperor cult, the city of Rome itself, the Roman Empire, these things are about to be judged in chapter 19. Final judgment begins to occur in 20, 21, and 22. So I would suggest, you are still free to disagree with me, but the events of chapter 19 have already taken place. And they were found in the physical judgments upon the forces of the world that were against the saints in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries. Again, you may disagree with me if you like to. That's totally fine. Chapter 20 is where final judgment will begin to take place. I think that distinction will be more clear as we begin to read those chapters. Mike, I'm sorry, you've had your hand up for a while.
As far as the economics, and it's something that, again, things come around, because of the setup of their government, with the city-state concept, they had complete control coming from Rome to Jerusalem. They had control over Corinth. They had control over Ephesus. They had control because they had their people put in those places.
Yes.
What can we glean from that? We can glean the same thing as we've gotten same-sex marriage that has been pushed on us from our centralized government in Washington that has gone to most of the states now. We have legalizing certain drugs that has been pushed through that central state government, which was originally set under Roman rule. And so we need to be very careful that in our complacency, we don't realize that the same thing could happen again as far as this destruction of morals, getting us further and further away from God-like attitudes. And so we need to learn from this and glean from, okay, what got them in that situation, because it's too easy for us to go, oh, that's happening in XYZ state, it's not happening here. When if it happened out there, it will happen here.
True. Those are all very good points, and it depends on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, how you want to, or a realist. Pessimism and realism, they go hand in hand. It depends on how you want to react to what Mike just talked about, which I think is true. remember, I went to college to become a politician/lawyer and realized that there is no point in fighting that fight in that arena, because the circle of history is more or less set. And the course of the world, we may be able to slow things down, please don't get me wrong, I think that a Christian's place needs to be in government. I think all of us should go out and vote. All of us should speak up as much as possible. But all we're doing is we're slowing it down. And it is inevitable that the forces of the world will encroach and take over. And what we really have to prepare for is here's the problem. What's the Christian nation? The church, thank you. It is not the United States of America. People still make that mistake all the time in thinking that the United States of America is a Christian nation. It is not. It never has been. It was based on Judeo-Christian principles, which is why we have enjoyed such a good run of it for the last several decades. However, it is not the Christian nation. The church is the only Christian nation that's the only one that ever will be. So, soon, I don't know how soon, I don't know how we measure this. I do think the internet is making these things happen a lot faster than they used to. And it's making it a lot easier the mechanisms of persecution will be much easier to enforce when all they have to do is look at your credit card number and, those sorts of things. What we have to prepare ourselves is not to continue the fight at the ballot box, but to continue the fight spiritually. You can convince your neighbors that abortion is wrong, and I think you should. Eventually, we're going to lose that fight, and what you need to do is convince your neighbor that Christ is Lord. You can convince your neighbor that certain forms of taxation are wrong, and you should vote your conscience. But eventually, what we'll be left with is convincing our neighbors that Jesus is Lord. And so on and so on and so on through all of our favorite issues, so that it doesn't matter so much whether you listen to Air America or Rush Limbaugh. What matters is that you preach the gospel. And by the way, I actually have strong opinions on the other as well, but I'll save them. It is your loyalty to Christ that is so important. And the fact of the matter is that when these things begin to get difficult again, it will probably change our priorities in wonderful ways, so that we will once again remember what is really important. Persecution just has a way of doing that. So, we'll see as those days come around. All right, so I've got a lot of hands to deal with. Let's start with Dwayne.
I was just going to reiterate what you said. I believe that for a long time.
Mhm.
You could go and you could run for office. You could elect to office.
And you should if you can, absolutely.
But you would probably
But
make very little to zero impact on the things that are happening. You would make more impact in just influencing the people locally around you by your actions.
yeah, I think
And
so.
hoping that they go on and, so on. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a domino effect from there. I honestly believe you'd be better off in life and you would actually achieve more by doing that than by running, or even if you got elected president.
Mhm.
I don't think you can make that much of a difference.
Yeah, and again, I'm not, so I'm in between the realist and the pessimist. I think that Donald Trump's most lasting legacy will be the Supreme Court justices that he has appointed, because his presidential executive orders will be immediately overturned by whoever comes along next. But it's a little harder to change the Supreme Court justice, and the way that we have our society set up right now, the Supreme Court justices have a lot more power than they were ever supposed to under our Constitution. And so he has bought us a little bit more time in terms of the social programs that the forces of the world want to inflict upon our society. Having a more conservative Supreme Court will help hold that off for a while longer. But again, it's inevitable that it's going to change too. So I'm not discouraging you from running for office. I'm not discouraging you from voting. I think all those things are very important, but they're buying us time. Just remember what the Christian nation really is. It's the church. That's what the Christian nation is. All right, Gigi, I think you had your hand up. No? Mike, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, when we look at this, and you go back to when the Reformation movement started and Restoration came from that, and can't even look at a so-called documentary anymore without them going in some sort of little sex scene. And you're going, why did you have to do that? Why did you have to use foul language? Why did you have to? And so we have to make sure in each one of our families to make the church stronger, we have to shield our own families within our own house, and then together help shield each other.
Yeah.
And that's the only way we're going to put off the world from entering in.
Yep, I think those are fantastic points. And I would correct one thing you said. You said the internet must be stopped. I think the point of it is, and this, yes, it goes right along with what we're talking about, that it cannot be stopped. That it is part of it's a good tool, but at this point it's basically the forces of the world are in charge of it. What we have to do, what we see in the message of Revelation is to realize who's behind all of these different things and determine where we want to participate with, because we run the risk, if we participate with the wrong things, of quote unquote receiving the mark of the beast, which has always, even in Revelation, been a symbol of identification with and cooperation with the powers of the world. We have to decide how much we want to be involved in it, knowing where the various acts of judgment is going to come along. And I'll get Dwayne and Jerry in just a minute. There's a great passage. Because I'm in the wrong prophet. If you look at Jeremiah, I think it's chapter 36. Don't worry, I'm not going to preach a separate sermon on this, but Jeremiah is just loaded with good stuff. And let me see if I got the right chapter. Nope, it's chapter 35. Sorry, Jeremiah 35. There is this great example of the Rechabites. Read up on them and see how it overlaps. It's a group of people who decided that things were so bad, and this was not among Rome, but among Jerusalem and the so-called people of God, that idolatry had gotten so far out of hand that the Rechabites decided to just remove themselves from society and not participate in that society any longer, and to make rules for themselves that were actually stricter than the rules that God actually had in his law. But they said, we just can't have anything to do with this anymore, and so they just, we're removing ourselves from society, and live their own nomadic lifestyle, and God praises them for that. Now, we have to be careful, because are we called to live monastic lives as Christians? No. What are we supposed to do? We are the city set on the hill, so that our light is supposed to do what? It's supposed to shine. So 1 Corinthians 5, Paul says, when I said don't associate with these ungodly people, I wasn't talking about people of the world, because then you'd have to go out of the world. I was talking about the church. You have to associate with idolatrous, thieving, drunkard people, because you're the church, and that's how you influence the people around you. We have to be sure that the influence is going the correct direction. But there are other things where we just have to throw up walls and say, well, that's it. I can't listen to 93.3 anymore, or whatever it is. To find places to draw the lines, to say, I need to be a part of society and influence it in a good way. But now in this circumstance, society is beginning to influence me. And that's where I have to say I'm not going to cooperate with what Satan's trying to do through that vehicle anymore. All right, because I do have text to get to, let me take your comments quickly, and then I'll jump back into the text. Go ahead.
That's what it is, real quick. It's a two-edged sword right now, and the bad thing is anybody and everybody can throw up whatever they want to. They can throw up their opinions, and they can throw up
yeah.
and evil things. But the good part of it, anybody and everybody can throw up their opinions, which can be good opinions and whatnot. The minute you start regulating that, and throughout history, you've ended up, anytime you're trying to regulate information, it always ends up bad. Book burnings in Nazi Germany, for instance. Just about any country that started regulating things, the government had an agenda, and they wanted you to think the way they wanted you to think.
Right.
And that's what would happen if we got too hard on regulating.
Right.
Now, there are tools personally that you can use to try to filter out some of the garbage that comes through, like ad blockers, and you can block pornographic sites from coming into your life so that your children aren't able to see those types of things. And you should definitely look into putting those things in place. But I kind of have to look at it. It's a balance. I mean, you cannot
Yeah, well, eventually, sure. That's true. Bruce, I'm sorry, you had your hand up before and I forgot.
You know, we can be in the world, but not of the world.
Right, that's the goal.
Because what God did, he carefully placed things like eternity and the kingdom in our hearts,
Yes.
where it couldn't be touched. So our spirit is the real nation, because I mean we could be run hither and fro as a congregation, but God said, I'm placing the kingdom, I'm placing eternity in your heart, so you can be here and all this stuff can be going on around us, but if our spirit is right, it can't be touched.
That's the key.
Even
Spirit.
physically.
Yep.
But that's where it's supposed to be. That's where it is.
Good.
Not outside.
Good. Jerry.
It's a worldly example. Let me take a minute. The Scotsmen, whenever they were fighting the Queen Scots, they took their dirk, which is a dagger, and attached their kilt to the ground so they could not. When the British kings hordes came out of so I've always thought of that dirk as the scriptures. It's just always that picture. Well, it's.
I'm not smiling because that's, well, I can't tell you why I'm smiling, but, all right, so let's, back to chapter 19. Because of time, I just need to point out a few things for you to appreciate the text. The word hallelujah appears in verse 1. This chapter is actually the only place that word appears in the New Testament. What does that word mean? Yes, it's actually a Hebrew word transliterated here into Greek, which means they're doing that on purpose, right? They're holding its Hebrew meaning. It appears throughout the Old Testament, especially in the book of Psalms, and it is comprised of two words, hallelujah, and the Yah represents what? Yahweh. That's exactly right, God. So that I would suggest that you add hallelujah to the list of words that you don't use flippantly, like OMG and the other ones, because what you're actually saying is the name of God, praising the name of God. That's a good word for you to put in that category of important words to protect. So that word actually appears here 4 times as just the essential word of praise to God. And what are they praising God for here? For his, starts with a J. For his judgments, yeah. His judgments are now going to begin. The saints are finally getting relief and vindication from all that they've suffered at the hands of these forces of the world. Man, all right, clock is bad. It's like not only did we switch our clocks forward this morning, but they kept going faster. Jump all the way down to chapter 2, verse 8. It was given to her, that is the bride, to clothe herself in fine linen. So wait, first of all, what I have to say before I say that. Why the imagery of the marriage feast? What's going on there? I entitled this lesson, The Marriage Feast of the Lamb. So what's going on with that imagery?
Christ in the church.
Good. So we have to correctly understand this imagery, we have to understand marriage customs in the first century, which are a little different from ours. How do you do it these days? Wait, that's a really dangerous question. When you get it, how long is there between the engagement and the marriage these days?
6 months a year.
Yeah, it can be pretty quick. And engagement is considered to be, there's kind of a deal on the table, but you're getting the caterer and the venue and, that kind of a thing. And so that if the bride gets cold feet before the doors open at the back of the church building, and she says, nope, I'm out, and walks away, no harm, no foul, right? I mean, the family will be upset, and the caterers will want their money, but was there ever a marriage? Nope. In the ancient world, how did engagement work? That was a little different from ours. It was basically a marriage. It was the union. They were betrothed to one another. So that when you were betrothed, the wedding feast would not be for a while, usually a period of 1 year among the Jews. But during the betrothal period, basically you had already been promised to one another. So much so that if there were some indecency found, what had to be done? You had to get divorced. So it wasn't just like, all right, see you later. There was an actual divorce that had to take place. You didn't get to enjoy the union yet. That was not until the marriage feast and the wedding night. But the betrothal period was a period where you were truly attached to one another. So keep that imagery in mind as we look at this and we consider our relationship to Christ in the church. What period are we in right now in this imagery? We're in the betrothal period right now. The wedding feast will come when we join our master in the heavenly lands forever and ever and ever. That's when the marriage feast of the Lamb takes place. Yes, Dwayne?
Also, real quick, back then, the marriage, it centered on the groom more than the
Right.
bride, whereas it's a complete reversal. You know, it centers more on the bride.
That's a good thought, yeah.
When,
It is
when he paid the dowry, that they were married. In the Hebrew tradition.
Interesting.
But they couldn't get together. They had
Not
to
to the
stay
wedding
separate.
night. Right.
But they were legally married when the groom pays the dowry.
I didn't know it was at the point he paid the dowry, but
Right.
that would certainly make sense that it goes along with the betrothal. And think of the various images that we have in Scripture of this. What period were Mary and Joseph in when Joseph found out she was pregnant? The betrothal period. What did it say that he wanted to do? Needed to do? He was going to put her away. He wanted to do it secretly to not embarrass her, or because he was a righteous man. But anyway, look at the proverb in Matthew chapter 22. I'm sorry, not proverb, parable. Matthew chapter 22 and verse 11. And you'll see where this whole imagery comes up again, where you've got a wedding feast taking place, and the host comes in and finds some who are not wearing their wedding garments, who are not properly dressed for the occasion. And there are spiritual points that are made about that. Of course, you can remember the parable of the virgins, right? The 5 foolish, the 5 wise who brought their lamps with them. Lots of different places where this imagery comes up. Mike, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it goes back to the whole matchmaker, and we think about the way even the movie The Quiet Man popped in my mind, the way that John Wayne and what was her name? Maureen O'Hara, thank you. And the way that they had to, but how it was a period of time where you got to know the person, but in reality you were already spoken for.
That's a good way to put it. You're spoken for,
And
yes.
the fact that you were already spoken for is very similar to us today. When we were buried in baptism, Christ is now spoken for us.
Yeah.
And we are now in this relationship time that we should get closer and closer to Christ, that on that bride day or on that marriage day, which is judgment, we now are going to enjoy all of the benefits of that union.
Good. Remember how Paul speaks of himself? It's either 1 Corinthians 11 or 2 Corinthians 11. I can't remember. I betrothed you to one groom, that is Christ. It wasn't you weren't to be a follower of Paul. He was the matchmaker, betrothing you to Christ. That's who you were betrothed to. So, I keep meditating on Dwayne's point. The way that the ancient custom happened when the wedding day came, the groom had prepared a hall for the feast, and that's when the message would go out. Okay, everything's ready. Come on, y'all. And he had prepared a place for them to spend the night, and then he would go and get his bride, and the bride would be brought to the wedding hall. So there was much more of an emphasis on the groom, and that's how you see it here too. Christ is the center, and he's bringing his bride in for the nuptial feast, for the rejoicing to begin, and that, of course, is the church. Okay, look at verse 8. The fine linen, the clothing, those are the righteous acts of the saints. Actually, in Greek, that's one word, dikaiomata, which is righteousnesses, which, of course, is very clumsy in English, so we don't translate it that way. But there's a scholarly debate as to whether that's the righteous acts of the saints or the righteous judgments which God has given to the saints in order to declare them righteous. I kind of prefer the former because that's the way I'm used to thinking of it, that we have a part to play, a role to play in our own presence at the wedding feast. And that goes along with Matthew 22 very well, actually. But there's another way you could read this, that it's God who's providing us the wedding clothes that we need to be able to come into his feast. And honestly, that makes a lot of sense too, so you could read it either direction. If you look at verse 10, remember at the very beginning of Revelation that it is an angel that has been leading John around through these various things that he's witnessing and writing down for our benefit. Suddenly, as we're drawing to the end of these things, it says, I fell at his feet to worship him. What does the angel do? No, don't do that. Now, we can excuse John because there's a big difference between angels and people. And if you or I were ever confronted with an angel, we would probably hit the deck too, in reverence and awe, and perhaps even in an effort to worship this amazing celestial being that we see. But what is the important point? And I'm so happy that John provides us this view here. Two things that are important. First, one about the nature of God and one about the nature of angels.
Just servants.
The angels are nothing more than servants, just as we are. They may be different in a lot of it, walk through walls and fly and however else you want to imagine what angels can do. But at the end of the day, they are created beings just as we are. They're actually, other passages tell us, servants on behalf of not just God, but of us. Of us. That was why Satan rebelled, because he was unsatisfied with that position, that the angels were created in service of humanity, who is the true pinnacle of God. So, don't worship angels. What's the point about the divine? What is to be worshipped? God and God alone, because he is the creator. Angels are created beings. So it doesn't matter how cool they look or how mighty they appear, they are not to be worshipped because they're not the creator. Creator is the only thing to be worshipped. I could say a lot about Jehovah's Witness doctrine here from this passage, because they make Jesus into an angel, which belittles him. And they change passages where Jesus himself is worshipped, and they don't realize the force of those passages. They show us that Jesus is divine. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
And this is not the only time in Revelations that John attempted to bow to something else.
Right.
And so in each case, it is constantly pointing back to God. It's constantly pointing back to, look, God is where you should bow. Not
Good.
to these beings, not to the angels, not to all the other things.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, so look at the end of verse 10. There's kind of a difficult phrase there. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. That's a kind of a difficult phrase to interpret because there are two ways that you could take it based on the preposition of. You want to guess what I'm thinking? Or what's one way that you could view the testimony of Jesus?
Belonging to,
Based on the of.
belonging to.
Yeah, that's not what I mean. Yes, Jay.
Do you mean the testimony about Jesus or the testimony Jesus gave?
Thank you. That's exactly right. That preposition of has a lot more than two, actually, but here, two possible meanings. Let's take this a modern illustration. Did you hear the news about the news of Trump? The news of Trump. What does he mean? Is it what Trump said or what happened to Trump? You see how the same preposition can be used in two ways. And that's how you have to look at it here. And there's no way to decide except the context. Thankfully, either could be true. If this is the testimony about Jesus, which is that he is the divine Son of God, then it makes very good sense that Jesus is the spirit of prophecy because he's the one inspiring prophecy and the word of God. If this is the testimony that Jesus himself, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. If it's the testimony that Jesus himself brings, then that is him inspiring the word of God in this world. If it's the testimony about who Jesus is, then that's the key to interpreting the word of God, is understanding that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Everything else is based around that principle right there. That's how you can test the spirits. It's a bit ambiguous. Thankfully, either of those two things are true. So you can look at it either way you want to. Skipping on down into verse 11, this is a really important scene here where John sees heaven open. A white horse, he who has sat on it is called Faithful and True. There's a previous scene, we've seen a horse before and a white horse before. Those were not Jesus. How do we know that this one is Jesus? Because it's a little odd, right? We thought we were about to see a wedding feast, and instead we see a warrior. But how do we know that this is Jesus? All right, he judges, which is something Jesus alone does. We see the way he's described, faithful and true. Look at verse 12. His eyes are a flame of fire. That's how God was described in chapter 1. He's got the rulership crown upon his head. And this is cool, a name written upon him which no one knows except himself. What does that mean? Kind of an odd tattoo to have. You can only read. Chrissy doesn't like me saying it's not a tattoo. He appears with a name written on himself that nobody else but him can read. What does that mean? When you have guarded your own name, I mean, there was this idea in the ancient world that if you knew somebody's true name, then what did you have over them? Think of your password today. If somebody knows your social security number and your password, what can they do to you? Ruin your life. Absolutely right. And so that's maybe a poor illustration, but it gets our minds wrapped around the same idea that if somebody knew your true name, they could have power over you. And Jesus, there's nobody who has power over Christ because he guards his own name. We obviously know many of his names, but this is talking about the power he has to guard himself. Look at verse 13. He's clothed with a robe dipped in blood. This could be the blood as a result of him conquering his foes, but I think it more has to do with the redemption that he provides. And the clearest definition of all, his name is called the Word of God. John 1:1, right? In the beginning, that's right, Charlie, was the Word was God, the Word was with God, the Word was God. This is Jesus himself, the Son of God. You'll notice the armies, they come with him. They don't much participate in the fighting because Jesus doesn't need any help to win. And what is it that wins the battle for Christ in verse 15? It's the sharp sword that comes out of his mouth, it's the Word itself. So, in a lot of ways, it's the Word that conquers. You see the name written on his thigh, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, which is in all caps because it's often an Old Testament way of referring to God as well. We've got another angel who calls all these forces of the world to assemble, to eat of the flesh of kings, mighty men, horses, those who sit on them, etc. Everybody assembles to make war against Christ, but of course Jesus wins. And here's where the judgment upon these forces of evil begins. Verse 20, the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet, who performed the signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire which burns with brimstone. And the rest were killed with the sword which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse. So judgment begins at this point, and we just now have seen the judgment of the two beasts. So, chapter 20 next week. Any comments or questions as we leave chapter 19?
Isn't
Yes,
that,
Bruce.
or could that spirit of prophecy be referring to all prophecy is led by the Holy Spirit, which testifies to Jesus?
Yes, I think that is one of two equally accurate ways to view it. The spirit of prophecy bears the testimony that Jesus is the Son of God. And if you don't come bringing that message, we don't care about anything else you have to say. Also, it's not
So the spirit of prophecy is that all prophecy is led by the Holy Spirit.
Yes, Jesus is the one through the Spirit who inspires everything. Jesus is also the object of all true prophecy. He is the inspirer and he is the object. Both of those things are true. Good. Great question. Great comment. Anybody else? All right, chapter 20 next week. And we're coming to the exciting conclusion. We got 20, 21, 22 for our next 3 weeks. All right, thank you.
If the archetype of sin is to get what you desire in exchange for adultery, let's say in the fraud sense. So to say that at least Trump is giving us judges, right?
Yes?
Right? To say that, okay, I'm just like Eve said, yeah, I want their fruit, yeah, and I want the knowledge, right? Okay, but I'm not going to tell you that death does. So if we're willing to settle for that part that we desire, right, we also have to settle for that other part over here that is less desirous, but it is the tribute you have to pay.
I see what you're saying. Although in our system, division, executive branch, judicial branch, legislative branch,
Right.
we're not going to get anybody first. I'm not a Trump fan, but I do think that, and that's why I said it the way I did, because the most lasting legacy will not be any of the things he has done or said in his own branch of government. It's going to be setting up the judiciary with some keeping the balance of 5-4 more conservative than liberal, because a lot of the social talk, we know that Trump himself is a social liberal. In terms of his own, behavior, it's immoral. But the decisions that these judges will be called to make will largely have to do with things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, abortion rights cases, things like that. So the way the society, the Constitution was set up, each state should be allowed to make their own decision about those things anyway, right? If we don't want to have voters in the state of Florida, we should be able to say, you know what, you want to get rid of it, you need it there. But the Supreme Court has a judgment that says, nope, constitutional right of the states. Those you decide yourself. So having judges in that particular body that will hopefully hang on to those principles a little while longer, I think would be a good thing. And it's inevitable.
Hey, Corey, how you doing?
So, I guess what I'm saying is I can separate out the evil of the man and the stupid things he's done from some of the better decisions he's made. The economy. I mean, we're going to pay for that down the line. Nobody can argue that. And Bernie would never do that, right?
No.
Because as socialists, had Bernie and Trump gone up against each other in 2016, I believe Bernie would win. I've always said that. I said that before 2016. Whether it's Bernie, Trump, Bernie's going to win. Like, we can't have a socialist run over this and to say, oh, things are so bad, we need more socialism. And people are saying, what? Things are pretty good.
But the idea, you can't come out and state that, right? The concept is so embedded, right? Almost under the surface.
Which concept?
The concept of socialism.
Oh yeah.
The concept of socialism. I mean, almost totally embedded. But one of the things culturally we've always had trouble admitting is that the group is more important than the individual.
Yes.
Right? Even though we work as a group, right? But we always hold to this concept that the individual can rise.
Yes.
Or the individual is important, right? Well, others that says, okay, well, communism is my thing, right? So China has no problem saying, hey, the group matters, right? And you as little individuals, No.
That's why they've imprisoned some 1 million Uyghurs in the North. They set them up. We don't like you. Off you go.
But at the same time, there were two books I wrote back in the 70s, the Naked Capitalists and the Naked Communists, right? And they're both the same. Because if you look at the structure, right, there's always that top 1%,
That's the fact, right? Yeah.
right, that is there. Now, they love socialism as long as
they're on the top.
Exactly, right.
Which is the same. I mean, I don't understand why it is. I do understand how the young people are buying socialism because they're only viewing it from what its proponents say, and because we no longer teach history, they don't understand what Stalin was about, what Marx was about, what's happening in North Korea and China. They don't understand those things.
But what they do realize, and what's really hurting them, their concept of capitalism, is that
Everybody else gets theirs.
where they are structured right now, you wouldn't believe the number of people that have been turned down for mortgages, right? Because of student debt.
It's crazy.
Right, and it's like we have a group of people now that are so burdened, right, to debt that they have a I'll never get from under this. And that's not that they don't like capitalism. They're just saying, hey, whatever we're doing, I didn't get my piece. That's what's happening.
The student loan fees.
And it's so pervasive, but what they see is just like you tell me that $2 trillion tax and 1% got 83% of it. Like, and me as a young guy and I'm trying to make it, man, I got a problem with that. And that's why young people are under right now. We got it under that. That's why they'll choose. They'll choose an alternative, but they won't go out there.
Well, they might, because...
Well, the number of young people that went out and voted for Bernie in the states that he's winning, right? Very. Even though they go to the practice.
By the way, I'm not worried about shaking your hand because neither one of us would ever drink alone.
Yes. You should be. It's supposed to be here all the time now. That's good. All right, let me get my junk together here.
It's the imagery is real important.
It is a good image.
Dirt is what I'm saying about Mary Queen of Scots, and she's Mary Stuart, and I don't remember who the other family was. It was the Stuarts, and I can't remember the other name.
Tudors.
Yeah, Tudor.
Good morning, everyone. It is good to see all of you here this morning. I am also always grateful to be among the number of the faithful brethren here, the Church of Christ. And I want to tell, if you're visiting, we are so grateful to have you with us. And we're thankful that you join us to worship God this morning in spirit and in truth. We hope that everything we do is right before God. We would ask you to fill out a visitor's card if you would. You won't find them in the back of the pews anymore. They're a little larger now. So we have them in the foyer. And if you have one, you fill it out, would you please leave it in that little table on the foyer? We'd appreciate that. For all of our brethren here, we're grateful to see Wendy's visiting with us today. Again, so glad to always see her. I do want to remind us all, here I'm going to do it right in front of you. You know what I'm doing, right? Yes, sir. So we don't interfere with our worship service this morning. I am grateful to be here. I think the Crumps are not here this morning for good reason. But I have tried to fill in. I just want to make sure that Bruce is going to be doing our opening prayer, and Wayne's our closing prayer, and Michael Yop our closing announcements. He'll pick up anything I miss. And everyone else who's supposed to be here will be in place so that our worship can go orderly and well and proper, so that people can have an attitude that I am here to worship God, because he has been so good to me. And I'm grateful for the mercies, the loving kindness that comes to me daily. And I want to remind all of you, if you don't have access to the electronic family report that John puts out every Friday, please get a hard copy. It's on the foyer table. Would like to encourage you to remember those of our number who need our prayers, and there are many on our list. So I'd appreciate if you would do that. We do have to add 2 more announcements to what is in the family report. Doug and Becky and family are all ill this morning, so that explains their absence. So want to ask for prayers for them. A little more good news. Can we always use one? Ashley and Alex are expecting Janet's first great-grandchild. Aren't we happy about that? So, I now encourage you to watch the screen behind me, and as we worship in song, join our voices together and blend them to praise the God that's so good to us.
Number 149 this morning, I will sing the wondrous story. If you would like to, please stand while we sing. I will sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me, how he left his home in glory for the cross of Calvary. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it when and glory, gathered by the crystal sea. I was lost, but Jesus found me, found the sheep that went astray. Through his loving arms around me, drew me back unto his way. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. He will keep me till the river rolls its waters at my feet. Then he'll tear me safely over where the loved ones I shall meet. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with the saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea. Please be seated. Our next song will be number 83, In the Hour of Trial. In the hour of trial, Jesus plead for. Let me start that over again. I've got it wrong here. Hold on just a second. In the hour of trial, Jesus plead for me. Let my basic trial I depart from thee. When thou seest me waver, with a look recall, nor for fear or favor suffer me
Let us pray together. Dear Father, we come to you this morning asking a special blessing for your church, asking a special blessing for your believers, that we worship you in spirit and in truth. We ask a special blessing for this congregation, that we act as a beacon of light for this community. Make us strong where we are weak in our faith. Make us strong in our spirit, dear Father. We thank you for planting deep within our hearts the concept of spending eternity with you. Planting deep in our hearts the kingdom so that we can protect it from harm, from governments, from evildoers, and even from Satan, dear Father. Help us not to compromise our faith with sin and our fleshly desires. Make us strong in this community so that people will want to know Jesus. Make us strong that we can not be ashamed to invite others to come and worship with us and learn the truth about Jesus. Help us to live the truth, dear Father, as individuals and as a group. Help the world to look to us for guidance instead of us looking to the world for guidance. Dear Father, we thank you for choosing us as your children, being our Father, protecting us, guiding us, directing us. We thank you for being true to your word, true to your promise to us. We thank you most of all for delivering your Son so that we could have a pathway to the eternity that you've planted deep within our hearts. Dear Father, we know that we come from sin, but we know that we have forgiveness if we only confess our sins, confess our weaknesses, come to you humbly, loving you with all of our hearts and all of our spirit and our strength, and loving each other as you love this church, as we love ourselves, dear Father. Help us complete that circle that you've joined, that you've drawn for us, the circle that says we love you, and we cannot love you without loving our neighbor, and we cannot love our neighbor without loving you. Thank you so much, dear Father. So bless this church this morning. Bless us as we leave here, that people will see the light leaving this church and follow it and come back to us. We thank you so much for healing us of our sickness if we only come to you in faith. Dear Father, thank you for being with us this morning. And we pray to you as your believers, as your children, as your followers. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the loving Spirit of the Holy Ghost, we say, amen.
Bless the brethren. We'll be reading in the book of Mark, chapter 10. Verse 35 to 40. And James and John, the two sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus saying, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask you." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Grant that we may sit one of your right hand and one of your left hand on your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, to be baptized with the baptism which I am baptized?" They said to him, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you shall drink, and you shall be baptized with the baptism which I am baptized. But to sit on my right hand, on my left, this is not of mine to give, but is for those whom it has been prepared for. When Jesus told them this, that you will drink of the same cup that I drink and will be baptized with the same baptism that I'm baptized, he was prophesying their predicament in life, because he was talking about suffering and death. And they said that they could, and he indeed told them that they was going to have part of it. That's why, okay, they was thinking of an earthly kingdom. Jesus came to give and establish an eternal one. But they was thinking of an earthly one, and they saw themselves sitting by the king, and the king, as he said, can you drink the cup that I drink? They saw the king passing the cup to them, and they grabbing the cup. Yes, of course, just pass it. You're the king, you don't got no germs. By the way, they had the coronavirus by then, so they had no problem taking of the cup of the king. So, but that was not what Jesus was talking about. Jesus came to establish an eternal kingdom. We can see that on 2 Timothy. They was thinking of carnal kingdom, and Jesus came to offer an eternal one. But there was a price that they would have to pay. Second Timothy 12. If we, from verse 10, please. For this reason I endure all things for the sake of those who are chosen, so that they also may obtain the salvation which is in Christ Jesus, and with an eternal glory. They wanted to sit, they said, we want to sit by your side in your glory, but they were thinking of an earthly glory, fame, pomposity. But Jesus came to offer an eternal glory. And it says, 11, it is trustworthy statement, for if we died with him, we will also live with him. If we endure, we will also reign with him. If we deny him, he also will deny us. If the verse 12 here, when it says endure, the Spanish version says if we suffer with him, we will reign with him. So it's a part of the cup that we have been invited to partake and drink. He wants us to reign. We have to be willing to drink the cup he drank and to be baptized with the same baptism that he said. What does the Lord's cup mean? What does it mean to partake of the Lord's table? The cup that we drink speaks of the blood shed. The bread speaks of the broken body, and the baptism speaks of death. These emblems, these elements that we partake of, when we do it, we speak of suffering and death. Is it strange that Jesus told them that they will suffer and die? Was it exclusively speaking to them too, only to both of them? Or was he speaking a truth that every Christian needs to understand? We have been called by God to drink of the cup, to partake of his body, and to be baptized with his baptism. We are not doing something different. We are just following his steps. That's what we are doing. He said in John 16:33 that we'll have affliction in this world, but to be of good cheer, because he overcame the world. And he said strange that Jesus told them that they will suffer and die. Was it exclusively to them, or a truth that we all need to understand? There is a story about a man that was persecuting the church. This man went from place to place, arresting them, put him in jail, and he was part of the mob that partook of the death of the first Christian named Stephen. So now he's going to Damascus, ready to arrest people and bring them to the Sanhedrin, and Jesus appeared to him. And it's my version, smacked him. So now he said, Lord, who art thou? And he said, I'm Jesus, who you're persecuting. And so now he said, what should I do, Lord? And he said, go to certain street, I believe it was called Straight, and it will be told to you what to do. So now Jesus appeared to Ananias, another servant, and said, I need you to go to and act for this man called Saul of Tarsus, to pray because he sees you coming in a vision, praying for him, and he being healed from his sight. He said, Lord, I've heard a lot about this man. This man is arresting the people, and he even has permission here, cards, letters to arrest people over here. That's the reason he's here. And he said, go, because he's a chosen vessel unto me. Because I will show him how much he must suffer. He was going to give him a cup to drink. So is it strange for us to be told that we will suffer and die? Or is it so true that we all need to understand? That's what we do when we partake of the table. I would like to read, in closing, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12 and 16. First Peter. Is it first? 4:15. It says, I'm sorry. Let's start from verse 12. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you. The Spanish version says at the fiery trials, which comes upon you for your testing, as though something strange were happening to you. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of his glory, his eternal glory, you may rejoice with exultation. For if you are revealed for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. Make sure that none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or evildoer or a troublesome meddler. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, he's not to be ashamed, but it is to glorify God in this name. So as Paul the apostle will say in Philippians 1:21, as unto me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If we decide, we all have been invited to partake of the cup and be baptized with the baptism he was baptized, to share with him in glory. If we suffer with him, we shall reign with him. And let's partake of the supper. God bless you.
Let's focus our minds now on Jesus as we sing number 152, By Christ Redeemed. By Christ redeemed and Christ restored, we keep the supper of the Lord, and show the death of our dear Lord until he come. His body given in our stead is slain in this memorial bread, and as we drink we see the blood until he come. And the sad dark betrayal night, with the last advent we unite, by one bright chain of loving right, until he come.
Appreciate Stephen's word in the song. We were studying in the high school and middle school class this morning, Hebrews, the 9th and 10th chapter. And while I think about this sacrifice in a personal way this morning, I think about how it affects me and what God did to provide his son so that I could come back to being perfect and have a relationship with him. I was struck, and I just want to share with you, you know, you've heard this, but it was for all men. Everything they did in the Old Testament was no effect in taking away sin. And this sacrifice we're looking at, while it is for me, it goes back to every man who will ever live. And I think what power that is, that I can join those by faith and have the blood of Christ take my sins away. And his body a sacrifice that pleases God, that I can come into his presence again. What a great blessing. We're going to ask Charlie. There you are. Give thanks for the bread.
God, we thank you for this opportunity to celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, our Savior. As we've taken this bread, let us remember the body that was given on the cross. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. As we continue serving the emblems, let's bend to give thanks for the fruit of the vine.
Our Father in heaven, we come to you thanking you for this cup with which represents Christ's blood which was shed on the cross for the forgiveness of our sins. We ask that you be with those that partake of it, that they do so in a manner pleasing unto you. This prayer in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Has anyone been overlooked in the serving?
This concludes the Lord's Supper. We have a great opportunity now, as we've been instructed in the New Testament, to return to God a portion of that which He's given to us. This has always been something that God has required of man. To recognize His goodness, His mercy, His loving kindness, and to take a portion of that. We don't give it back to God in the sense that God needs it, but we give it to the things on this earth so that they can be served. And this congregation is good with using its funds scripturally and in things that need to be done. So this is our opportunity to contribute. This is our opportunity to show the Lord just how much we recognize the blessings He gives, and we're going to give an opportunity to give thanks before we do the collection.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for what you do each and every day for each and every one of us, and that when we give back with a pleased and giving heart. And All glory to you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
God, my King, thy might confessing, ever will I bless thy name. Take thy way, thy throne impressing, till the light thy praise proclaim. Full of kindness and compassion, slow to anger, fast in love. God is good to all creation. All His works is good and true. All I've heard, the Lord shall bless thee. Thee shall all thy saints adore. Kings of great shall thank and confess thee, and proclaim thy sovereign power.
Hello. This morning's scripture reading will be Hebrews chapter 9, verses 23 through 26. This passage reads, "Therefore it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter a holy place made with hands, a mere copy of the true one, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Nor was it that he would offer himself often as the high priest enters the holy place year by year with blood that is not his own. Otherwise, he would have needed to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now, once at the consummation of the ages, he has been manifested to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself."
Our next song is number 31, What a Savior. Once I was straying in Dinsart Valley, no hope within could I see. God sent from heaven a loving Savior to save a poor lost soul like me. Oh, what a Savior, hallelujah, His heart was broken on Calvary. His hands were nail scarred, His side was riven. He gave His lifeblood for even me. He left the Father our song, next song will be number 454, Let the Beauty of Jesus Be Seen in Me. If you want to mark your invitation song in the book, that will be number 7 after the lesson. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. All his wonderful passion and purity. May his spirit divine all my being refine. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. When somebody has been so unkind to you, some words spoken that pierces you through and through. Think how he was beguiled, let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. From the dawn of the morning to close of day, in example and deeds and in all you say, lay your gifts at his feet, ever strive to keep sweet. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you.
Good morning, everyone. I know we've all lost an hour of sleep, and so we're all struggling just a little tiny bit. I thought about maybe we could start our service this morning with calisthenics. Maybe a few jumping jacks would help us to get in the mood, but I'm going to do the best I can to replace that with finger calisthenics by asking you to turn to a few passages this morning that I want to talk about. The first of them is in Numbers chapter 15. If you want to be getting there, we'll get there in just a second. Welcome to all who are visiting with us this morning. You are our honored guests. We appreciate so much the effort that you've made to be here, and we appreciate you, and we invite you back at any time. If you have any questions for us, we'd love to hear them, but really we just love to shake your hand, let you know how much we appreciate you. Recently I was checking my 3 favorite websites for the day's news stories. That's how I get my news anymore. And I came across a headline that read, "Man gets life in prison for stealing $4 package of socks." And I thought, what? Man gets life in prison for stealing a package of socks? And that's certainly an attention grabber, and it grabbed my attention. So, yep, I clicked through that story and read it. And it turns out that there was a whole lot more involved the farther you got down in the story. Yes, indeed, on March 29th, not this past year, the previous, Dean Rockmore, age 48, was stealing a $4 package of socks. He was also a twice convicted felon. He also was carrying a gun while he was stealing said package of socks. He also brandished that gun when he was stopped by Walmart security, which means that he was not really just arrested for stealing a $4 package of socks. He was arrested for armed robbery. And as a twice convicted felon in some states, that will get you put away for quite a long time. That's how we get from socks to life in prison. And so it's a little silly to make that suggestion. It would be like me saying, I got life in prison for running a red light. When, if you dig down farther into the story, you discover that I was also drinking, and I T-boned a minivan in the intersection, and I killed 5 people. And then we'd say, oh, that's why we get the long prison term, not for running a red light. The point is, sometimes you just need to read a little deeper than the headline to figure out those scandalous stories that we see.
And here's the thing I want to mention to you this morning, that sometimes people will have that same reaction to certain stories, to certain passages that are in the Bible. That if reduced to nothing more than an attention-grabbing headline, they sound like they are scandalous. And in fact, skeptics will sometimes bring these stories out and they'll say, what is going on right there? Does that really accord with our understanding of a just and fair and good God? And when you just look at the headline, you might say, ooh, that does look bad. But if you dig into it a little bit more, you might just discover there's more going on. In fact, there might even be some important lessons. So let's start with the first of those possibilities this morning. If you're looking in Numbers chapter 15 with me, and you start right there about verse 32, it says, while the sons of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation, and they put him in custody because it had not been declared what should be done to him. The Lord said to Moses, the man shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death with the stones, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. If we reduced this to a headline, we might say something scandalous like, do you know that there's this place in the Bible where God tells them to kill a man because he was picking up a few sticks? We might say, ooh, that doesn't sound very good, does it? That sounds pretty extreme. That sounds like God is kind of petty. That sounds like he's mean. But dig into this story a little bit more. The man's fault was not just randomly stooping down and picking up some sticks like a little girl walking through a field might stop and pick a flower here and there. His crime was breaking the Sabbath, which is one of the 10 Commandments. God had very, very clearly given instruction to his people to do their work on 6 days, and then on the seventh day, on the Sabbath day, to rest. He had repeated that instruction on multiple occasions. So Exodus 20 is where you have the 10 Commandments. Exodus 23, verses 12 through 13, that rule is repeated. It's actually repeated in the book of Leviticus. In fact, God emphasized that there were no exceptions to that rule. In fact, if you look at Exodus chapter 34 and verse 21, he even talks about some of the possible rationalizations and exceptions that the people might try to bring up. Exodus 34 and verse 21, you shall work 6 days, but on the seventh day you shall rest. Even during plowing time and harvest, you shall rest. There's none of this, but my crops are coming in just on this 1 week. I've got to work through the Sabbath. God said, nope, not even that. You maintain, you keep the Sabbath. You keep it holy. And God had already, in fact, on another occasion in Exodus 16, verses 23 through 30, demonstrated his displeasure with their breaking of the Sabbath. You might remember that situation where he talked about the manna. I will provide the manna for 6 days, but on the seventh day, don't go into the field to get the manna. You're to rest on that day. What did they do? They went out into the field to get the manna. They did not collect twice as much on the sixth day as God had told them to do. What did God do? He did not supply them the manna. There were a bunch of Israelites on that day who walked around the fields hungry and spent the whole day with that ache in the pit of their stomach because they did not obey what God had told them to do. He had already taught them that lesson. And in fact, he had already twice declared the punishment. If you look at Exodus chapter 31, I'm telling you, he talks about this a lot, verses 12 through 17. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, you shall surely observe my Sabbaths. This is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. Therefore you are to observe the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. For whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord, so that whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall surely be put to death. This is a perpetual covenant that he says. In fact, one more. Look at Exodus 35 and verse 3, where this is repeated again. In fact, the penalty is there in verse 2. But in verse 3, you shall not kindle a fire in any of your dwellings on the Sabbath day. This is not a sermon about Sabbath keeping, because we, under the covenant of Jesus Christ, have no such restriction. This is a lesson about taking God seriously at his word. This is a lesson about looking at a passage like Numbers 15, where it looks like God just randomly flies off the handle at this individual to say, no. God is not capricious. God didn't just wake up on the wrong side of the bed that morning. This man was not put to death for picking up sticks. This man was put to death for preparing a fire, for defying the Lord's explicit word regarding the Sabbath day after repeated admonitions. And by the way, in Numbers 15, when the man was set aside because it had not been declared what to do with him, it was not that the penalty had not been declared. It had been. That it was a capital offense. He shall be put to death. That had already been described numerous occasions. They didn't know how. That was what had not yet been discussed. They were waiting to see what God wanted them to do to carry out the sentence. That's why God says stones. That it was a capital offense had already been described many times. Is there not a powerful and important lesson in this passage that goes far beyond any suggestion that God is just mean? It's that God means what he says. That's what it is. And maybe we don't think something like this is a big deal, but different things are important for different reasons. For example, you may think it's no big deal to bring an orange into the state of Florida. Come on, it's just one piece of fruit. They stop you at the border and they ask you that question, especially if you're driving a truck, because there's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is at risk. They want to inspect that orange to be sure that there's no disease that could wipe out people's livelihoods. A little orange, but it's not the piece of fruit, it's the threat to the billion-dollar industry. We might contemplate the reasons why Sabbath breaking so angered God, but it is God's prerogative to defend his own holiness and to enforce penalties for crimes that may seem petty from our perspective, but to him, there might be a very good reason for this which he has called so holy. Let us not trifle with God. And beyond the lesson to that individual himself, I think one of the things that's going on here is the lesson that is passed down from generation to generation, that God is in some sense making an example of this individual, that I will defend my word. There's a story that's told of a man who takes his son on a fishing vacation. They're going to spend a whole week trout fishing. And so they've got all the plans, they've got all the gear, they go up to Montana or wherever it is to do the fishing. And they get there a day early, and they're kind of scoping out the place. They just want to see what the lake's all about and kind of, make sure all the equipment's working. So they go out there the day before. Yeah, come on, just throw a line and see what happens. Oh, there's a bite. And the man pulls in the bite, and he's got a world-class, amazing trout on the end of his line. And he looks at his son, and then he realizes it's the day before the season starts. All of a sudden, there's a decision that has to be made. It may seem like a minor, meaningless thing. Come on. In just a few hours, the season will open and it won't make any difference. I don't see a park ranger or a wildlife officer anywhere on this lake. I can get away with it. But you know who's in that boat? His son is in that boat. And there's going to be a powerful lesson that's going to be taught one way or another in that boat that day. And is it really worth that fish? That lesson is about how important obedience really is. And how important it is to live a life following the rules and not making exceptions. And that's what the story of Numbers chapter 15 is trying to teach us, that these things are truly important. God didn't strike a man dead because he picked up a stick. God was defending his holiness that he had set forth for a reason in many ways. Let's look at another example, another story that if you reduced it to a headline on the internet, it might sound scandalous, like, man struck dead for saving God, or something along those lines. What in the world are you talking about? Well, flip over to 1 Chronicles chapter 13 with me. 1 Chronicles chapter 13, let's check out another example. And you may have seen this story before, or you may not have. This may be a brand new one to you. It's buried in 1 Chronicles chapter 13. And what's happening here is that David has solidified his reign. It's now becoming a more peaceful period in Israelite history, so that he's got things pretty well secure. The military is doing its job, so it's time to bring the Ark of God from its temporary structure way out there in the wilderness and bring it into David's capital city of Jerusalem. And indeed, that should be a time of great rejoicing. The Ark is the mercy seat. It's the place where God has chosen to put his name. Although God cannot be reduced to a box, we all understand that. For the sake of the people, for his presence dwelling among the people, that Ark of the Covenant represented his dwelling place upon the earth. So of course, David wants to do the right thing and to bring that Ark out of its wilderness setting and bring it into the capital city of Jerusalem, where it can bless the people. So if you pick up the reading in 1 Chronicles chapter 13 and start, I guess right about verse 6. David and all Israel went to Kiriath Jearim, which belongs to Judah, to bring up the ark from there, the ark of God, the Lord who is enthroned above the cherubim, where his name is called. They carried the ark of God on a brand new cart from the house of Abinadab, and Uzzah and Ahio drove the cart. David and Israel were celebrating before God with all their might, with songs and with lyres and harps and tambourines and cymbals and trumpets. All so far so good, right? When they came to the threshing floor of Chidon, Uzzah put out his hand to hold the ark because the oxen nearly upset it. You can imagine this. It's on a bumpy dirt road. The ark, which would have had the cart, which would have had wooden wheels, probably hits a little rut or it hits a bump or whatever and threatens to tip. And he's driving the cart and he just reaches back and keeps it from sliding off into the dirt. Could have smashed it. It's a reflexive action. He's doing a good thing, right? He's saving the box that belongs to God. So verse 10 is a little surprising. That the anger of the Lord burned against Uzzah. So he struck him down because he put out his hand to the ark and he died there before God. What? Why did God treat him that way? Why would God strike dead a man whose only intention was to keep the holy mercy seat from hitting the ground? And furthermore, why would God spoil such a festive and wonderful atmosphere of rejoicing, returning the ark to its place? Well, apparently God looks at that situation a little differently than we do. And indeed, a deeper examination of God's law shows us that God did not overreact, that God did not fly off the handle, that in the book of Numbers, God actually gave very specific descriptions of how the ark of his presence was to be transported. And so if you look at Numbers chapter 4 and verse 4, and also Numbers 4 and verse 15, you'll see that the ark was to be covered with the veil, so that it would never be touched. In fact, it wasn't ever even to be looked at. It's quite fascinating that if you really look deeply into it, when the tabernacle was to be struck so that the people could move, the priests were to first unlatch the veil and kind of walk backwards with it and drape it over the ark. Because remember, the only people allowed in the presence, the Holy of Holies, was the high priest one day of the year on the Day of Atonement. Not even when it was taken apart was anybody to go in there. So they took the veil down and in a manner of speaking sort of collapsed the holy place upon itself and just covered the ark with the veil itself. That veil was always to separate man from God. God forewarned them about why they should do this. Numbers 4 and verse 20. So that they will not touch the holy objects and what? Die. The rules had already been laid forth for their safety. And then if you keep reading in Numbers 4, verses 1 through 4, there were a special group of Levites, the Kohathites, who were to use poles. That's why these rings had been built into the side of the ark, in order to slide those poles into the rings, and they were to hoist the ark onto their shoulders and carry it. Because while an ox cart can be upset, a group of priests carrying the ark will not be. And that was the way God wanted it carried, on the shoulders of that group of priests, and no other way. And in fact, as if to even emphasize this, if you look at Numbers 7 and verses 6 through 9, that when Moses was giving out the materials for every group who had to do their jobs, all of the groups of the priests were given a cart and oxen in order to carry stuff around. They were specifically not given to the Kohathites. That's Numbers 7, verses 6 through 9. Why? Because they weren't supposed to use an ark and a cart to carry stuff around. It was the poles, and they were to carry it on their own shoulders. David, Uzzah, and all the people should have known God's will regarding the transport of the ark. Uzzah's sin was not intentional. Uzzah's sin was not particularly wicked, if you think of it from our perspective. And nevertheless, to God, it was an outrage. It was a flaunting of his rules. That if things had been done God's way, the ark would have never tipped in the first place. And so we have to realize that our handling of God, or our handling of the things of God, must never be casual. God is defending his holiness. David, back in 1 Chronicles 13, realized his sin. We know this because not only did he bring the celebration to a halt and parked the ark right where it was for several months, but when he did it again, when it was time now to finish the ark's journey, if you look at 1 Chronicles 15 and verses 12 through 15, you will discover that it's done the right way this time. In fact, David even says in verse 13, "Because you did not carry it at the first, the Lord our God made an outburst on us, for we did not seek him according to his ordinance." They learned their lesson. God was showing them that if he is going to dwell among his people, he is going to dwell among his people on his terms, not on their terms. And that is certainly an important lesson for us to learn in our lives today. That's not a story about God saying, "What do you think you're doing?" Pow! That's God defending his holiness and demonstrating that everything he declares is important. For the sake of time, let's skip one and go to our last one. Let's look in the New Testament and look at the book of Acts, Acts chapter 5, because here's one more story that I know you've probably heard some skeptic throw at you and say, "Man, that's a mean God you all serve. If he would strike somebody dead for something as tiny as this, you money-grubbing Christians, you." Let's look at the whole story and let's dig down into it. You know by now I'm probably talking about the story of Ananias and Sapphira. And in Acts chapter 5, what happens here is, let's do a little reading. A man named Ananias with his wife Sapphira sold a piece of property and kept back some of the price for himself with his wife's full knowledge. And bringing a portion of it, he laid it at the apostles' feet. Peter said, "Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back some of the price of the land? While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not under your control? Why is it that you have conceived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God." And as he heard these words, Ananias fell down and breathed his last. And a great fear came over all those who heard it. And the young men got up and covered him up, and after carrying him out, they buried him. You can keep reading, and you can see about 3 hours later, his wife comes in, Peter asked her, "Tell me whether you sold the land for such and such a price." She said, "Yes, that was the price." Peter said to her, "Why is it that you have agreed together to put the Spirit of the Lord to the test? Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out as well." And immediately she fell at his feet and breathed her last. And the young men came in and found her dead, and they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Wow. Seems like God woke up on the wrong side of the bed that morning, and Ananias and Sapphira just happened to be the first two people he saw that made him angry, and he sure did let him have it. In fact, he let them have it because they were greedy and they didn't put enough money in the contribution plate when it went around. But that's not what's going on here at all. What's going on here, first of all, the crime that is being committed is not the crime of greed. This is not the passage that you'd want to preach when you wanted to encourage the congregation to put more in the collection plate, because that's not what is going on here at all. They were not confronted nor struck dead because they did not put enough in the collection plate. Indeed, what Peter says is, when you sold that property in verse 4, that was your property. After you had the money in your hand, that was your money. You could do with it what you wanted to. What they were confronted for was the sin of lying. And if you look at the previous chapter, context is always helpful, right? You'll see what was really going on in their hearts. Because in chapter 4 and verse 32, it says, "The congregation of those who believed were of one heart and soul. Not one of them claimed that anything belonging to him was his own, but all things were common property to them. And with great power the apostles were giving testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. Abundant grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them, for all who were owners of land or houses would sell them and bring the proceeds of the sales and lay them at the apostles' feet. And they would be distributed to each as any had need." And look at verse 36 and 37. "Joseph, a Levite of Cyprian birth, who is also called Barnabas by the apostles," which translated means son of encouragement, "and who owned a tract of land, sold it and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet." Oh. So you see, Ananias and Sapphira had just witnessed Barnabas sell a piece of property and bring the money and lay it at the apostles' feet. So here, use this in the support of the saints however you see fit. And in fact, look at all of the good press that he got. This is where we first meet Joseph. And this is where he's given the name Son of Encouragement. I want a nickname like that. I want that kind of attention. So Ananias and Sapphira says, "Hey, we've got this extra piece of property too. Let's sell it. And when we bring the $100,000 that we get from the sale of the property, hey, I've got a great idea. Let's bring $30,000 and say that's what we sold the property for." If they wanted to bring $30,000 of the sale of the property, they certainly could do that. That was their prerogative. It was their land. It was their money. This is not communism. This is people bringing of their own means to support the saints in a time of need. They could do what they wanted to. The problem is that they pretended the money that they were bringing was the full sale of the land. They were holding it back and making it look like they were more generous than they really were. It's not Peter who gets mad at them, it's the Holy Spirit. He specifically says in verse 4, "Why is it that you have conceived this deed in your heart? You have lied not to men, but to God." If you wanted to sell your house and bring the full proceeds, that's up to you. If you wanted to bring half, that's up to you. If you want to bring 5%, that's up to you. If you wanted to bring 0, that's up to you. That's not what's going on here. It's that they made out that it was 100% and had only given some and had kept back the rest for themselves, still wanting the same kind of attention. That's why God steps in and makes an example out of this couple that I'm sure otherwise were probably a lovely couple. By the way, you can also see from this passage that God is not a respecter of persons, that both of them were individually confronted with this. Both the husband and the wife had to pay the consequences for their crime? The crime of lying, not the crime of stinginess. And just to show you that God knew what he was doing, and that he wasn't just temporarily mad, if you look at the very end of the story, if you look at verse 11, it says that great fear came over the whole church and over all who heard these things. In other words, they realized in a very powerful way that God was not going to be trifled with, that, we could tell stories to one another, but you can't pull anything over on God, that God sees, that God knows what's going on, and that's the one that we have to deal with. And if you look even a little bit later, you'll notice verse 13 that none of the rest dared associate with them. However, the people held them in high esteem. And all the more believers in the Lord, multitudes of men and women, were constantly added to their number. That setback of the loss of a family, because God was demonstrating his holiness and his omniscience, actually resulted in a very high attitude of who God is, God's person and God's nature. And it was a little speed bump that caused the church to continue to grow and to grow and to grow. You might think that news like this, the God that they serve takes things pretty seriously, might drive people off and say, I don't want to hang out with them. I'm not going to confess the name of that God. It had the opposite effect, that more and more and more came to serve this kind of holy and righteous God. So I hope that you can see, when you confront a story like this in Scripture, when somebody throws something like that at you, God, your God is a mean God. He's just silly and wretched, and he beats people up, and no, that's not what's going on in those stories at all. God is holy. God is consistent. The amazing thing is that God dwells among his people at all, that he is as patient and loving as he is. And always remember that when it comes down to God's definition, yes, we can see his wrath displayed, but ultimately God is love. That God is love. And he has given his own son so that nobody would have to face a situation like this where our sins lead us to spiritual death, but that we can be forgiven and dwell with God eternally. That's the ultimate message. We serve a holy God, a righteous God, indeed a loving God. This morning, Brother Mike has an invitation song selected for us. If you are subject to that invitation, if you need to confess your faith in Jesus and be baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, won't you come as we stand and sing this invitation song?
There is none like him, none can compare. The God is equal, the Prince is there. Lift up your eyes and see his great light. Soar like an eagle, always alight. Saints, lift your voices, the darker day.
be here, wasn't it? You know, if you're visiting here, for years the church was known as a Bible-toting, Bible-quoting people. That's what we were known as. The Bible says it, we believe it, that settles it. And John's sermon was just so on point because, you know, it says in Proverbs that the most wise man will be as the most foolish God ever is. And that is, we have to remember that God's wisdom is way above man's wisdom. I hope that you were able to get the two handouts out there. Wonderful article John wrote on the treasures in earthly vessels. It's a wonderful read if you'll pick that up on your way out. And this is great for your refrigerator. I usually take it and put it in my Bible and then put it on the visor, and that way I can look at. I try not to do it as I drive because that's not good policy, but I try to keep it there because I'm in traffic so much. It's nice just to grab it and start thinking about things that we need to pray on. The good news that we had in the bulletin that we did mention, and Dwayne, I've always considered you a member, so I'm surprised that you officially, because you had the unofficial to be official in my eyes. So for those that you know, Dwayne's part of the family, has been for, as far as I'm concerned, years. So Dwayne is officially wants to work with this congregation, which is fantastic. I'm going to ask Brother Brown to lead us in a prayer. Evidently, it looked like April maybe had another asthma situation, so her and Wayne had to leave. Keep her in your prayers. You may have noticed that Angie also had to leave. She's dealing with this stomach thing that's happening, so keep her in your prayers. We're going to have a short men's meeting. If we can, the men of the congregation, let's meet over here in this room right after the amens. But can we please meet our visitors first, because that is so important that we do that. I don't think we have any other announcements. Thanks to all the men who participated. As Brother Charles said, it needed to be decent and in order, and all glory goes to God. Brother Brown.
Let us pray. Our God and Father in heaven, we bow before Thee at the close of this service, thanking Thee, Father, for this day, the first day of the week, that we're able to come out in the quietness of this building and to study Thy Word and to sing praises unto Thee. We pray, Father, that You will reach out with Your healing hand and heal the ones that are sick and need Your strength. We ask Thee now to be with us as we separate, watch and care over us, and bring us back at the next appointed time. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.